So hello everybody, you are listening to our podcast on the NDIS, and specifically today we are focusing on the underqualification of carers both in physical kind of hiring companies and also with hiring sites online. You're with myself, Sarah Honke, and my partner Claire Gavin, and I think we're just going to jump straight into it.
Yeah, so the NDIS was established in response to a 2011 Productivity Commission report that found disability services were underfunded, unfair, fragmented and inefficient. The Commission recommended a system of flexible individual funding packages that could be used to purchase disability supports.
When it's fully rolled out, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is NDIS, will provide about 460,000 Australians under the age of 65 who have a permanent or significant disability with fundings for support and services. And apparently for many people, it will be the first time they receive the disability support they need.
That information about the NDIS is officially supplied by the government on the NDIS page.
I think that we should throw to someone who actually has had to go through the process of getting funding for a couple of her patients that she cares for. We're about to hear from Sian J on the process of getting funding, how difficult it is and how long-winded the actual process is.
So process of the NDIS funding is extremely long. For a lot of families it can take anywhere from 3 months to 2 years, and it comes along with disability assessment to see where you sit on the scale. Then you apply with the NDIS. On top of that, that's paperwork, reviews, interviews. They come and assess your living situation, working situation. Again, for kids it's a bit different. They look at family situations. They may go to schools. They'll ask a lot of therapists. You have to provide an incredible amount of documents, assessments, evidence, and then that goes back into review funding within the department. And yeah, again, that process then afterwards can take another 6 to 9 months to get your plan in the end, and sometimes that's not always a sufficient plan either.
So you just heard from Sian J, who is a carer who works predominantly with children with disabilities. We'll also hear from her a little bit later in the podcast. I'll just intro some other people that you'll hear from during the podcast who are all carers. Aris Spate and Talia Fox. They have both worked with various agencies throughout their times of being disability carers. And I think right now we should hear a little bit from each of them about what they think about the current state of the NDIS.
My opinion of the current state of the NDIS. That's a pretty big question. I think in theory the NDIS is a really amazing thing. I think it's wonderful, and what they're trying to do is going to help a lot of people. But at the same time, I think they are not really focused on each individual person. There's a lot of people who know how to rort the system and they get more hours than they need, and they've got bigger plans than what their disability may actually require. And then there's people who need more hours but they don't know how to get what they want, and when someone just tells them no, they think that that's the final straw, and it's really you have to fight for the hours that you want and for the services that you need.
And it also seems quite inconsistent with what it's willing to give some people and others. So I had a client who really needed a new wheelchair because the other one wasn't working for her. You know, it was electric and they couldn't get it in and out of the car because it was heavy. And so she just wanted a lightweight one. And they were like, no, we can't give it to you. And then I had another client who had 6 wheelchairs that she'd all been given by the NDIS for different circumstances. So there's just a lot of inconsistency there, which isn't great.
So the current state of the NDIS, I think the NDIS has a fantastic aim, and what they're trying to do is help families and people living with disabilities to live a better life, to provide a higher quality of life and care. And I think in the way that they have planned it out, it's good. But in execution, I think there's still a long road to go. There are a lot of families that are still struggling, that are still being left behind, a lot of rural communities that are not receiving this sort of help and funding alongside, and a lot of people are missing out. A lot of families are missing out. As much as the NDIS focuses on people with disabilities, I think they have forgotten or have a lack of care around the carers and families behind these people with disabilities. So as a community, it's not working, but I think, you know, each individual person is getting better help and better support than they were previously.
So listening to all those carers, their opinion on the current state of the NDIS is they think it's quite poor. I think it's fair to sum up. So I think that we should chat a little bit about the difference between hiring sites and physical agencies. The difference between hire up and the agencies is with hire up, the carers are often in control of who they choose to look after, and vice versa. The patients can also choose the carers. It's been labelled as the Tinder of the disability world in comparison to the agencies who just send out various people, which leads us to underqualification and how terribly underqualified majority of the carers are in the industry.
According to the NDIS Commission site, the only acceptable check that one needs in the ACT to be a carer is a Working with Vulnerable People card and a background check. After the transition period, any carer may continue to work in the role for 3 years or until the check expires, whichever is sooner. So the carers that we interviewed spoke personally about the sites and agencies that they've worked for, not thoroughly, if at all, checking qualifications. Let's listen to first-hand experiences about how underqualified carers affect patients and families, as well as other carers.
When I was given a client who is deaf, and she communicated by using sign language, which I can't do, and I saw this on the support plan, and I emailed my employer saying that I didn't think I would be suitable for the session because I couldn't sign. And they responded being like, oh no, you'll be fine. She can type out messages on her phone, so you'll be able to communicate through that. I was still a bit iffy, but they were all like, no, it'll be fine. It's no issue. Well, it turns out she also has a learning difficulty. So her language skills weren't great. So she couldn't actually type out what she wanted to say in a way that I could understand either. So between her being deaf and me not being able to sign, and her not being able to type out in a way that I could understand, it ended up being, I think it was about 3 hours of really struggling to communicate.
So overall, my experience as a carer has been fantastic. I started off in schools, and the families that I work for, 99.9% of the time, are just beyond amazing, and I couldn't ask for a better job. However, there are people within the system that use that care and support that we give. I worked with a family around 12 months ago that was, in the end, abusing the system. They were getting a lot more funding than I think was necessary for their needs. And over time, that made them lazy. They ended up, me as their primary caregiver, ended up using me as their housemaid and their cleaner. And I would do their grocery shopping for them, which is fair. That's a job that I'm entitled to do. However, it was a bit too regularly. They asked me to clean their bathrooms, cook their food for them, clean their 13-year-old's room. And the last experience that I had with them, they made me move a bunch of boxes and heavy furniture on my own in their garage. And when I was unable to do this, and when I confronted them going, I wasn't able to finish the job, there's not enough room, and I'm also not strong enough, I received a lot of verbal abuse from their children and their family. They ended up going against me, and I ended up having to leave. I was not paid for a couple of months. I lost my job with them, and the company that I work for did not support me in the end. They just pushed it under the rug, ignored it, and told me to move on.
So those were some pretty heart-wrenching and awful stories there. And in summary, it can cause a lot of damage having underqualified carers, not only financially, emotionally and physically, but just in every other sense. Having underqualified carers really does have a big impact.
We reached out to both Bill Shorten's media rep and the NDIS Minister, Stuart Robert, for a response.
And we did hear back from Liam Hulliam, who is Bill Shorten's media rep.
He responded to our questions by sending us a link to the NDIS Commission website, which of course we had previously seen. Following up with, there is a prevailing call to introduce minimum qualifications for carers. Labour hire, low pay, and absence of any career progression also means that it isn't attracting staff suited to the work of a carer. Many of the providers say that the qualifications that are available, Cert 3 and 4, are unsuitable as a minimum standard as they are too broad. The interaction between various state laws and services and the national scheme is an ongoing concern. He signs off the email by saying that it is unfortunate he's in the opposition and that it would be worth us asking our tough questions to the official NDIS minister.
So should the NDIS actively be doing something about the underqualification in their carers, or should it be up to the companies and the hiring sites themselves? And should the government be putting pressure on these companies and these hiring sites to really do something about the underqualification issues that are happening?
It's hard because the scheme itself is the responsibility of the government. So should a required amount of qualifications fall under the scheme itself, or should a legislation be passed through Parliament? Whose responsibility is it to ensure that carers are correctly qualified to take care of vulnerable and disabled people?